Firstly, what is SCP Australia? And I noticed the slide refers to that well-known company of SPC in Shepparton, which puts out cans on your supermarket shelf. So my apologies there. Perhaps it's a case of having too much of those peaches for breakfast, but it is SCP Australia, and it is a program under CRC Care, in effect a trading name, which oversees the management and issue of certification of site assessment and management practitioners. SCP Australia itself is an organisation which consists of a National Executive Committee, you've heard reference to that, but it also involves assessment panels and it involves an executive officer. So that is the nature of the organisation. It operates under a terms of reference which are spelt out by CRC Care. That's not unexpected, it is a CRC instrument, it's part of a CRC program, but within those terms of reference, the National Executive Committee is given certain charter to run with and certain requirements to fulfil. CRC Care provides the financial and in-kind support to that organisation. It is expected that SCP Australia will develop to a standalone organisation within 3 years. Standalone both financially, possibly standalone as an organisation in itself, certainly standalone in terms of a brand that can be, if necessary, transferred at the end of the life of CRC Care. So it will be an ongoing organisation. National Executive Committee, just to be clear, I've put up the names and the representations of the people involved, and for the most part, the people that you see up on that slide are people that have been involved in the development of the scheme at the advisory board level, and I think it shows a great deal of faith in the scheme that has been developed. We don't as yet have a regulator representative. Andrew Przinski from South Australian EPA was involved in the advisory board, is maintaining a watching brief at present on the National Executive Committee, but is reserving his position based on workload in terms of his actual representation into the future. But so if there's any regulator representative out there listening at the moment, we'd certainly also like to hear from you if you've got a burning interest in this particular area. The National Executive Committee is in effect the governance of the scheme. It is one that is quite unashamedly, outwardly and deliberately one of sectorial interest. I hope you can identify one or two people there. If not, certainly go to the website and there is a little bit of a background on each of those members of the National Executive Committee. The objectives, I think again they would be something that would be not unexpected, something that was very similar to what was outlined in the consultation. I've listed them there on the slide. Fundamentally, it is about promoting best practice standards for service excellence. So it's about the ability to service clients, and I think that is really fundamental to the scheme. The second point is it is national, it is not state-based, and a lot of our questions and input in the consultation phase really were about, is it a state-based system or will it be a national system? And again, with the view of the various sectorial interests and representatives that we've had in the development of this paper, it is a national program. The other, I guess, point which is not in itself part of the decision making or under the direct control of the National Executive or SCP Australia is in fact the promotion and establishment of training resources to support practitioner development. Nevertheless, the NEC sees this as vital to the scheme, and in terms of going forward, identifying those training opportunities will be a key part of the role of the organisation. So what is the vision that we might get from such objectives? I think the vision involves improved outcome for all stakeholders. I think it's a centrepiece of professional practice that should be aspired to by all practitioners, and I think it will see continued improvement in professional practice. In short, I often sum it up as saying this is a coming of age of the profession. And that's what I think this certification scheme is all about, a vision. And if you have a vision for the profession, I think some of those words hopefully will sum it up. There may be others that others would add to it, but fundamentally the certification scheme is one of achieving a vision for this profession. So moving on to the key features of the certification scheme. Requirements for certification, the building blocks. The building blocks I've outlined on that slide are education, professional practice, competencies, continuing professional development, and ethical and professional conduct. They are exactly the same as the building blocks that were put out in the consultation paper. They remain the same, and it had, I would say, almost universal support from any of the comments that we received during the consultation phase, and we feel a degree of comfort and confidence that those building blocks should remain in place. Talking about each just a little individually, the education, very similar to what has previously been seen, but a minimum of a bachelor degree in a related science or engineering discipline from an Australian tertiary institution. We recognise, though, there are going to be various aberrations, and I don't mean that in a negative sense either, but there are going to be people out there that have different qualifications, different backgrounds, have grown up in the industry or have got an overseas qualification. They will be addressed on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't rule the potential for those people to belong to the scheme, but a priori it is the bachelor degree in the related discipline that gets you into the scheme, and the other disciplines will need to go through a second hurdle to ascertain their degree of equivalence. By a related science or engineering discipline, I think we're talking about things like applied science, soil science, agricultural science, hydrogeology, chemical engineering, geotech engineering, or environmental engineering. The sorts of things I think most people on the end of the line viewing this today would of themselves have or know that that is pretty well germane to the people working in the industry. Professional practice, it's how much experience do you have, what's the nature of the experience, what are your skills. There are 3 points to make here. One is the minimum of 5 years actual experience in the industry. That doesn't mean anyone with 5 years experience will be an automatic entry to the scheme, and not at all, but it is a minimum requirement. We find it hard to envisage that someone with much less than 5 years experience would have the other attributes necessary to in fact achieve certification. I think the next 2 points are important, the last one perhaps being the most important, but that experience should cover a range of situations, number one, but most critically the ability to independently manage the full scope of a contaminated site project. We really are about the ability to service clients, and I think that particular requirement sums it up in a nutshell. The competency elements, which are going to be the most difficult, perhaps for both assessment purposes and also for self-assessment purposes. It's one thing to have experience, it's one thing to have education, but how do you actually demonstrate you've actually got the competence to do the role required upon you on the job? And clearly there's no getting around it, but judgment is required in this area. Nevertheless, we can break that down, we can help break that down in a number of ways, and what we've done is list 6 competency elements that certain levels will need to be achieved in. I've listed them there on the slide, and again they are identical to what was outlined in the consultation paper in May. In effect, probably 1 to 5 outline the sequence that you will undertake in actually going through a contaminated site project. Number 6 is the all-encompassing element of professional practice relevant to contaminated sites and covers things like project management, perhaps the health and safety aspects, the legislative aspects and the like. So again, there should be no surprises in those competency elements, and I'll leave you to read those at your leisure rather than simply read them out. What is more, I think, of relevance is it's one thing to have the competency elements, but how do we assign a level to these and what do we call that level? This is perhaps where there's been the most deviation from what was issued in the consultation paper, albeit the consultation paper did outline a number of options. There's two aspects to level of competency. One is about terminology. How do we describe it? How do we dimension it? And the first thing to say is that each of those elements that you saw on the previous slide will need to be assessed at one of the 4 levels you now see on the screen. Previously, those levels which are now developing, functional, proficient and advanced, were inadequate, basic, competent and expert. So just in part it's a name change, but I think at another level there's a very real effect here. I don't think people that are applying will be inadequate. I think they will be on a developmental curve, and I think the name really reflects where people are up to and perhaps is less prone to some form of value judgment. So that's the first thing you'll notice as a difference. And the second thing you'll notice is that we're asking for proficiency, or the proficient level, to be demonstrated in 4 out of those 6 previous elements, being 1, 2, 3 and 6, and for at least a functional level for the elements 4 and 5, being the risk assessment and the management and clean-up elements. The view taken in this regard, and it was put up as an option within the discussion paper, although it wasn't the base option, and certainly we took a number of comments on this, both formal and informal, but the view and the underlying thinking of the advisory board was about ability to service clients. And the elements 4 and 5 are generally developed in a proficient to advanced to expert stage later in someone's career, but at a certain point in someone's career, a person is able to know enough as to what they don't know and where to seek that information out. So we feel rather confidently that people that may not be at the proficient level in those but have the basic functional understanding will be able to service clients. And that's been the shift that you've seen, or the major shift that you've seen between the consultation paper and the scheme that's outlined today. Continuing professional development, I won't dwell on this. Suffices to say again, pretty well the same as what you've seen in the consultation paper. We've remained at 50 hours a year. There was clearly some discussion about this point, but there's general agreement that that's about right. You can't undertake that 50 hours a year on private reading, that's clear. So there are a few constraints around that. There's a few practical averaging issues and the like, and if you can follow any of the detail of that through the website. Ethical and professional conduct. Again, there was an outline of this in the consultation paper. There have been slight changes to this, but again, I think the code that you will see that we expect a certified practitioner to adhere to is something that would not be unexpected and would cover the sorts of elements that are mentioned on that slide. The quality of the scheme and the integrity of the scheme is going to be protected by, should there be any complaint against any certified practitioner, that will be assessed against the code. So, as well as achieving the building blocks to maintain certification, the adherence to the Ethical and Professional Conduct Code will be the prime judge. Finances, the all-important thing of finance. The scheme is still on a not-for-profit basis, very strong, that's the underlying principle. The objective is to be self-financing in 3 years. The fees themselves, we felt there was merit in a subscription fee, an application fee and an annual renewal fee. And again, if you were to compare those to the consultation paper, the application fee was outlined at $1,000, we're roughly, if you add the subscription and application, it's $9.90. The annual renewal was outlined at $400. We're at $440. We believe that can give us a break-even organisation within 3 years. Process. I'm not going to go through all the details of this particular slide. Suffice to say there is an application and an assessment, and that assessment is carried out by a panel of assessors, which I'll speak about shortly, and that slide will give you, should it be refused, the nature of a feedback loop, etc., etc. But it's got all the detail you need to know on the website about how to make the application and how it will be assessed. Assessors, in the first instance, assessors will be drawn from appointed auditors in the state jurisdictions. We've had quite a number of interests from auditors, an agreement to act as assessment panels. Hopefully, at one level, we'd like to overload them. At another level, for their own sake, we'd like not to. But we certainly have quite a range of interests in the auditor, from the auditor fraternity to act as assessors, and auditors themselves are able to be certified under a reduced process to the one previously outlined. It is expected that as the scheme develops, there will be a number of senior practitioners that will also be able to contribute to that particular activity. Maintenance of certification, fairly simple. Annual fee, we've outlined that. Evidence of continuing professional development, and no adverse findings on the Code of Ethics or professional practice such that they would warrant non-renewal. I think, again, people would expect that. Benefits of certification. We see subscriber access, giving people access to the website and a number of tools on it. We have a self-assessment tool. We have the competencies broken down into a number of sub-levels. We will soon have where the education is available and the like. So there's quite a range of activities that will be covered there at subscriber access. Clearly, the next three things are really about the tick you get when you're a certified practitioner, being both an individual seal plus website recognition. And we also expect that this scheme will be able to give networking opportunities in the way of seminars and workshops to certified practitioners that will service their needs and interests. Once the scheme is established, the important thing is here we would envisage that certified practitioners will be sought as a matter of preference or even as a requirement by end users and regulators. That, in fact, is the end game we're looking for, and I think we put together a good scheme, we put together a scheme that people subscribe to and provide interest in, we'll achieve that. SCP Australia has the fundamental role of promoting the scheme. And it's not just, we're not just a committee which puts together assessors and says tick. It's going to have to be a work program which gets the certification scheme known and understood around the end users. Finally, where to from here? Well, I think I can say applications are now open. The website opened yesterday. I believe we even have one application. We certainly have a number of subscriptions. The way we're proposing to do it is 2 rounds of applications in the near future, one closing the 31st of December this year, the second on the 31st of March. We put closing dates there so that things can be handled as a batch to make the workload manageable. Certification itself will take effect from the 1st of July 2015, so in effect we believe that will be the real launch where we've got people with the certification able to go forward. And what we're saying today is while the applications are open to all, and we encourage anyone who feels they are able to apply to do so, should demand outstrip our ability to supply the assessment, we will be giving preference to auditors and those with 10-year plus experience. I hope you can understand that as a management approach to making sure we get the maximum high-quality people through the scheme at the earliest opportunity. The last point I want to make is that this scheme will be kept under review. It certainly, and it will be developed. It doesn't stop as of today. it is important that we continue to review the operation of the scheme and the requirements of the scheme with all stakeholders. It's important that we continue to develop the scheme, whether that's other categories of certification, whether it's servicing other needs, be that as it may, but we believe that that has got to occur perhaps at the 12-month mark of the operation of the scheme. So I'll leave you with that and encourage you to go to the website, which Paul will outline to you later in the seminar. Thank you.